Did you know that Disneyland in California covers roughly 510 acres, whereas Disney World in Florida spreads across 27,000 acres? That's 43 square miles and roughly the size of Manhattan.
That's crazy. That's 54 times bigger. As Disney fans who are known to go to the parks on both coasts on a regular basis, I would say the question we most commonly get, both from viewers as well as friends and family who are planning trips, would be, well, which one should I go to? Which one should I go to? Which one's better? The question of Disneyland or Disney World, while we certainly have a preference, it's not an easy question to answer because aside from just the size, there are so many differences between the two. So today, we're going to talk to you about what you need to know when it comes to the great comparison, Disneyland or Disney World.
Let's start with location because we got Disney's on both coasts in the United States, and we could probably do a whole podcast just on California versus Florida, and I don't know, maybe we will. But I don't want to spend this whole podcast talking politics. I will say briefly that if you're comparing California to Florida these days, it's political. Like you can't ignore it. These two states really couldn't be more politically different at the moment.
Yeah, they have one thing in common, and it's why Disney's in these locations, and that is that they're both warm and they can operate parks year-round. But that is like where the similarities end when it comes to Florida and California. And quite frankly, you're probably either a Florida or a California person. So Lake Buena Vista, Florida, it's spread out, humid, incredibly conservative. Anaheim, California, densely populated, mild weather, very liberal.
If you're a trans person, the choice is really easy. Go to California so you don't get arrested using the bathroom. If you're not trans and not particularly political, you're probably going to care a lot more about the following points we're going to discuss here in this podcast.
Yeah. It would have been helpful if they went ahead with their plan for a Midwest park like ever so many decades ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be a fun show, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah. The size discrepancy is tremendous. 27,000 acres in Florida compared to like a little over 500 in Disneyland. So it goes without saying, Disneyland's like this compact, walkable adventure, whereas Disney World is like truly, as the name alludes, its own planet. It's gigantic.
It's a world of Disney things.
It is, yeah.
Disneyland is just 3 hotels. Disney World has more than 25, which I think is a really funny phrase.
Yeah, that's the one.
Because it's like, so 26?
Yeah, it's
or
like,
what are we saying here?
Like, can we not count specifically? I think people just default to that because it's like, well, what are you going to count as a hotel? They have a few hotels that are like Disney hotels, but not quite owned by them. And they have some like, like DVC properties. So I think people just go with more than 25 because people like to argue about definitions. So
it's true. It is there's some gray area.
It's a shit ton of hotels.
That's the point.
Let's leave it at that. And then when it comes to the parks itself, over at Disneyland, you got 2 parks and a shopping district, downtown Disney. They are right next to each other. Disneyland and Disney's California Adventure, the 2 parks, are like literally staring at each other across an entry plaza. And then you walk to one side of the entry plaza and there you are in the shopping district. Then there's Disney World, which is 4 parks, 2 water parks, and then their huge shopping district, Disney Springs. The parks are Magic Kingdom, very similar to Disneyland, Epcot, Hollywood Studios, and Animal Kingdom. Now, these are all spread out over those 27,000 acres of Disney World. There is no walkability. Some hotels are walkable to certain parks, depending on where you're staying. But the parks aren't walkable to each other. Disney Springs isn't walkable to anything. Same with the water parks. You're dealing with transportation.
I feel like the only walkable hotel to park is the contemporary to Magic Kingdom.
Oh,
like,
okay,
is there
yeah.
another one that you can easily walk? I can't think of it.
Oh, sure. If you stay at like Boardwalk, we were walking to Hollywood.
That's right.
Yeah,
you
we
get
were
to
walking.
use the back door for Epcot.
We were walking to Epcot. Yeah, so
Those are big perks of staying at
They
those
are.
resorts, and those are not value resorts. Those are the pricey ones for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to boil all of this down, I mean, I think you can easily say that Disneyland is pedestrian and Disney World is very much other ways to get around. Buses, monorails, skylifts, boats, cars, and that's, part of the fun sometimes. But I think it's a part of the vacation that a lot of people don't account for and sort of end up pissed off about it when they realize that it takes a pretty long time to get from point A to point B at Disney World.
Yeah, it's something you have to factor in for sure. Like, if you're there for it and you plan for it, like Disney World, like, it's not like they didn't know that you were going to have to take transportation to get to things. Like, they tried to be thoughtful about it. In some cases, you get these, like, beautiful little boat ride options, and the monorail's fun, and the Skyliner is really cool. Like, so the transportation can be a part of your experience, but it's also just, you got to plan for it. That it's there.
I think Skyliner, kind of like a ride a little bit. Water transportation, kind of like a ride a little bit. Buses,
Not so much. Keep taking a bus.
the buses are fine, but I mean, it's got to be like the most chaotic and unreliable form of transportation at Disney.
Yeah, it can be New York subway style, or you can be going at an off hour and have a bus to yourself, but it's not.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced both.
It's not luxury transportation. So, okay. Moving on, that's the resort. Let's talk about just the general vibe.
Yeah, for sure.
So, I think by virtue of it being smaller, and by virtue of it just being nestled in the heart of Southern California, I shouldn't say the heart. It's not in Los Angeles. Some people will think it's in Los Angeles. It's actually in Anaheim, which is south of Los Angeles. But Anaheim is still densely populated urban area. There's a lot of locals who go to Disneyland. I mean, back when we lived there, that was like, we always referred to it as our country club. Now, this was back when season passes were way more affordable.
Right. It was an ironic name
It
once.
was. Right.
Now that's not even funny
Now
anymore.
it actually would be like going to a country club. But yeah, back then it was like we'd spend our like $200 a year or whatever and just pop over there after work some days.
So you're just dropping that number, but I actually feel, do you mind if I pause for a second?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because that number is not that far off.
I think it's high actually for like with the first year, like maybe 2005 when we did like a SoCal resident pass. That might have actually been a high number.
And they did monthly payments too. So if you lived in Southern California, there was kind of this magic time in the early 2000s where going to Disneyland, the Disneyland Resort, was a pretty cheap form of entertainment if you bought the annual pass. The hotels were always expensive.
Yeah.
But going to the parks themselves, not so much.
Yeah, and this seems like a digression, but it's really not when you talk about the vibe, because a lot of people in Southern California grew up going to Disneyland the whole time. So even as the prices have risen, a lot of people have hung on to that. And so it's very local heavy. Like it always has been. I mean, absolutely it attracts tourists, especially international tourists, but just by virtue of the size and the location, it has much more like homespun vibe, if that makes any sense.
Disneyland?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Vibe-wise, California and Florida are different in another way. There's not really like Disney adults, which is used as kind of an insult everywhere else, doesn't really exist in Southern California. Mm-hmm. Let's say that you lived in West LA or Anaheim or whatever, and you went to visit a friend and they were like, "Oh, what'd you get up to for your birthday?" And you were like, "Oh," and by the way, you in this story is like, you're a 35-year-old person, let's say. And you would be like, "Oh, me and my friends went to Disneyland, and then after that we went to like Porto's," and
Yeah.
no one would bat an eye. Like, it's just something that everybody does in Southern California.
Yeah, it's like treat yourself. Go
Yeah.
to Disneyland for the
and
day.
we live in St. Louis at the moment, And, you know, we go to Disney parks a lot. And so people often are like, oh my God, why do you go so often? To be a Disney parks fan, kind of anywhere else is
Yeah, that it starts to
it's
define
shameful.
you.
I don't want to say it's like shameful, but
It's just like people are like, that's how you spend all your vacations. Yeah. Whereas in Southern California, it's like, that's how you spend your Thursday night.
here,
Oh, yeah.
like in the Midwest, if you're a Disney parks fan and you go to Disney parks like occasionally, let's say even once a year, that pigeonholes you in a way that it really doesn't in Southern California.
Yeah, that's true. In Southern California, you're kind of a weirdo if you don't like going to Disneyland, or if you don't at least agree to go to Disneyland every once in a while.
It's like,
So,
yeah, I'll go to Disney, but I'm not going to do the rides that make me nauseated. So, okay, I'll go.
yeah. Vibe-wise, though, it is worth noting that Disneyland, because it's nestled in Anaheim, like the city runs right up to the like walls of the Disneyland resort, it is less immersive and it's a totally different feel because you can just kind of like step over a line and you're like, now I'm in Anaheim. And then you step back and you're like, now I'm in Disney. That is a totally different feel than Disney World.
You can't do that in Central Florida, right? It's like if you want to step out of the Disney bubble, you're going to get eaten by an alligator or an oversized spider.
Yeah, they actually have like signs telling you not to step out of the bubble so you don't get eaten by an alligator. Yeah.
The vibe at Disney World it's so much different for all the reasons that we've mentioned, but also just like because of the way you get around that resort, the Disney World resort, it means that the way that you spend your time there is significantly different than it would be at Disneyland. Disney World is mostly tourists compared to Disneyland. Given where Disneyland is, it's probably not surprising to find out that there are a lot of people that just go there after work, go there on the weekends with their kids, et cetera, et cetera. It's local for Southern California people. For Florida people, I'm not saying that people don't live in Central Florida, but just comparing size and location of park to total population, there's just a lot more locals for Disneyland. Part of that is that it's isolated.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I feel like if Walt could have, he would have put you on an island. But he's like, I can't quite put you on an island, so I'll put you on a chunk of a peninsula. And then and wall you off with swamps, you know? Yeah, it is isolated feeling.
So it's more vacation-y. I think isolated is sometimes used as like a negative way to describe something, but in this case, it really is cut off from like the real world. And so things that are really important to Disney Imagineers, like sight lines and exactly how guests perceive things, they have a lot more control over that at Disney World than they do at Disneyland.
Shall we talk the big one, price?
Yeah, let's talk price. First of all, I was surprised to find out that there is such a difference in price between the two places.
Yeah, and here's the thing: there's not the simple answer to the price question. In fact, if you Google like Disney World versus Disneyland prices, you'll get the like default response of like Disney World's actually slightly more expensive. Now that's only because that answer is responding to park tickets and like items you might be buying in the parks. Price tickets are just ever so slightly higher in Florida, and as are, items that you might be purchasing in the parks. But that's about where it ends, and that's simply because California is just more expensive than Florida overall. Flying into Orlando, it's a big international airport. It's going to depend on where you're coming from, but generally speaking, it's pretty affordable. And then Orlando International Airport is fairly close to the resort. There used to be a free shuttle. There is no longer a free shuttle, but you can get pretty affordable shuttles to the Disney resort. Where you'll see a price difference is when it comes to hotels.
Yeah.
There are so many hotels to choose from, and there are tiers of them. There's value, value, moderate, and deluxe.
Yes.
The value resorts are actually like true to their name. It's not like affordable for Disney. It's like affordable for hotels. Like they're often under $200 a night.
Think
And
like Holiday Inn Express prices,
yeah,
really.
yeah, absolutely. And you're staying in the Disney bubble. Like it's a true Disney experience that you're getting for like under a couple, best rates, like under a couple $100 a night. So that's a big difference because the hotels can add up on you really quickly.
I wanted to take a brief look at corn dog economy.
Oh, sure,
if we could,
sure.
because this is like comparing apples to apples, corn dogs to corn dogs. So we chose Corn Dog Castle, which is located at California Adventure, the other park at the Disneyland Resort, and then we chose Sleepy Hollow at Disney World. Who's the winner? Who's the budget champion?
Actually, Disneyland. Like in California, despite the fact that like anything in California is more expensive than anything in Florida, corn dog slightly cheaper, $10.49 versus $11.49 in Florida. So Disney World and Disneyland, once you get inside their resorts, they run on their own economies when it comes to ticket prices and food and merchandise and stuff like that. But you have to factor in the hotels being the big one, and then also just the travel to get there.
An option that you get in California that you don't really get flying into Disney World in Florida is multiple airports. Southern California has LAX, which is probably what you're going to fly into because that's where most of the affordable flights are going into. But you also have Long Beach and John Wayne, which is in Orange County. Both of those are closer, but most of the flights are more expensive to those airports. So chances are you're going to be flying into LAX and then figuring out how to make that rather long last bit of travel down to Anaheim.
And that's one where like that last bit of travel, that like LAX to Anaheim, it's Southern California, baby. Like that depends on what time of day you arrive.
And if you arrive at like 3 p.m., I'm so very, very sorry. It's
especially
going to
on
take
a
you
Friday,
like 2
like,
hours or more to get to Disneyland.
Settle into that Uber.
On the other hand, if you arrive midday on like a Tuesday or something like that, chances are you'll get from LAX down to Disneyland in, 45 minutes to an hour, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Either way, it's adding to the cost.
It is.
Yeah.
Another big difference is just the number of hotels. So we mentioned before that you only get 3 hotels at the Disneyland Resort and you get a bunch more at Walt Disney World. But like the way the Disneyland Resort tiers them is the Grand Californian is the big fancy one, and they don't use the terminology that Walt Disney World uses.
Yeah, they're like, just look at the prices and figure it out. Yeah.
And then Disneyland Hotel, which has been there the longest, is the middle one.
Yeah, still very pricey.
It really is. And then Pixar Place, which is the budget hotel, it's still like even at its cheapest, you're still looking at over $300 a night. So like Disneyland Resort hotel prices are reflective of Southern California hotel prices, which are generally a lot higher. I did also want to mention the Good Neighbor hotels, which you'll probably read about on Disneyland's website and wonder, should I stay in one of these hotels? The short answer is yes, if you're trying to save a lot of money on hotels, which is probably going to be the place where you can save the most in your vacation. The trade-off is that you'll be outside the Disney bubble. Like you are going to be in Anaheim, you're going to be walking past storefronts and bus stops and so on. You know, Disney has a big influence in the area, but still it's not the bubble, not the way that Walt Disney World is.
Yeah, they're not Disney hotels. They have like a little Disney ticket kiosk at check-in. But that's about it. You're staying at a Holiday Inn Express. You're staying at a Marriott, whatever. These can be perfectly fine hotels, but they will not feel like you're staying on a Disney property. So,
on the other hand, there are some hotels in Anaheim that do offer a vacation-y experience. Like I know that the Howard Johnson Hotel has like the splash pad or whatever. Mm-hmm. And there are, there are vacation-y style destinations. But like you said, they're not Disney. Like it's outside of this experience that Disney has crafted. And if it's important to you to stay inside of that, which it is to me, I mean, if I can afford it, then you're going to get less of that
Yeah.
at Disneyland.
Yeah, and sometimes during peak seasons, like, you just might not even have that option. Like, those hotels sell out. There's only 3 of them.
Right.
So, yeah, sometimes you got to book early.
Let's talk about like what it's like to be there, the experience of being at the park.
Yeah,
and why that's different.
Yeah, and we've touched on a little bit of this, but the actual experience of going to these parks, Disney World, the fact that you're inside the Disney bubble has pros and cons. So it's larger, meaning it's more complicated and you have to do more planning to get around. If you have a park hopper and you want to actually take advantage of that park hopper, like you got to do some planning because you're going to have to like actually travel between the parks. If it's Epcot and Magic Kingdom, like maybe you make that happen on the monorail and stuff, but there's still travel time involved. Getting around's more complicated. You got to factor it in. Now, one thing that is really cool is that Disney World, everything's just really made to operate seamlessly. The Magic Band system is a good example of that. So they strap a Magic Band onto you when you get to your resort, and it is like you can just leave your wallet and your keys like back at the room. Like that Magic Band can do everything for you. It's going to have your tickets on it. It's going to get you into your room. You can pay for everything with it. It really does create this kind of like, it's not an all-inclusive resort, but it creates that feel of like, all I need is this beep band and I don't have to think about the fact that I'm spending money. That's kind of cool. It does like have a big influence on how vacation-y and like cut off from the world you feel.
I'm sure there's an economic upside to this for Disney.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm sure. Oh, I think about it all the time. I'm just like, boop, 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 boop.
You make a really good point that it does make it feel like an all-inclusive resort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I never really thought about that.
Yeah, until you get your bill, like on your last day, and you're like, oh, son of a bitch.
They slide it under your door and it's itemized. You're like,
oh.
When it comes to the experience at Disneyland, I would say that everything is a little simpler. I feel like Disneyland is more manageable, the Disneyland resort, the whole thing, because it's just not that hard to get around. It's smaller. You don't have to memorize bus routes or where the monorail stops, which route the monorail is on, because there's a monorail, but it just goes on a loop.
Yeah, and if you're staying at the Disneyland resort and your kid gets too wet on a ride and wants to change his clothes or something like that, like...
That's a really good point. If you're traveling with littles and you're at Disneyland, getting back to the room and then back to the park, not such a chore. At Disney World, that could be like half your day.
Mm-hmm, totally.
The systems at Disneyland are a little less sophisticated, and by systems, I just mean like Magic Bands and the integration of everything. They're not going for that all-inclusive feeling. It's more like they're using Magic Bands, but it feels almost reluctantly.
Yeah, Magic Bands, you can use your Magic Band at the Disneyland Resort. It doesn't do much. It's not your payment system. It's not getting you into your room. You can like activate some things around the park.
Is that for real that Magic Bands do not work as room keys?
Correct. Yeah.
Wow.
Or last we were there about a year ago, and yeah, no.
Wild.
Mm-hmm.
Did Disneyland go Magic Band Plus, or are they still old school Magic Band?
They never were old school Magic Band. They're only Magic Band Plus.
Right. They held out so long that they were like, fine, we'll do Magic Band Plus.
They did Magic Band Plus, and it really all it does is activate some stuff in the park.
Also, I think it blinks when you're watching World of Color.
Right, yeah. So it's kind of a little like add-on gimmick that is not really making your experience easier. It's like a toy.
Is it a hot take that Magic Band Plus just sucks? Like, I think they were hoping it would be something different than it actually was.
I don't think it's a hot take. I think it sucks.
Okay.
Yeah, because you got to charge it.
Yeah, don't forget to charge your Disney tickets.
Don't forget to charge it. What?
Yeah, the original Magic Bands was just RFID, right?
Yeah, I don't need one more thing in my life that I need to charge. Like I travel with an old school Magic Band, like when we go to Florida. Like
Because in Florida, they still work, right?
yeah. The only thing that I'll bust out the Magic Band Plus for is there's like the Galaxy's Edge, like bounty hunting. Like there are some experiences that if you want to participate, and our kiddo does, the Magic Band Plus is like important to that. So I will make an extra effort before we go to Hollywood Studios to like charge my Magic Band Plus so that we can go bounty hunting in Galaxy's Edge. But
Have you experienced things in other parks that really take advantage of the Magic Band Plus? Because I can't come up with any.
no, there are those the 50th anniversary statues that like
Yeah,
buzz
those-
your band. It's like
Do
ridiculous.
they work for you? Because they don't really work for me.
Unreliably for me. Yeah.
I
so
see people just standing in front of them, like waving
Right.
their wrists back and forth.
yeah. I think there's
If it's really loud in the park, you can't hear it anyway, right?
yeah, you can't really hear it. One thing I will say before we move on from the experiences, the Disney cast members, awesome on both coasts. Cast members
Cast
are
members, that's why Disney vacations are fun.
Yep.
That's why there is Disney magic.
great. Let's talk attractions.
Okay. The ride count between Disneyland and Disney World, not as different as you would think. Okay. Like there's almost the same amount of rides at Disneyland as there is at Disney World.
Which is wild.
I know. So Disney World, if you look at all 4 parks, has 59 rides. Disneyland has 52. So this is between its 2 parks. So it's 4 parks versus 2 parks, and they're roughly equal ride-wise. When I first learned that, I was like, that can't be right.
Yeah. Yeah, no, rides are just packed way more densely into Disneyland and Disney's California Adventure. Disney World, those parks are spread out. They fill a lot of space with shows, other attractions, and also just space.
Right.
These parks do higher volume, so there is just more walk-in room. I mean, you think of something like Epcot's World Showcase, like there's a sprinkling of like 3 rides around this like massive area of park. So the ride count, not as different as you would think between the two. Both of them, however, have a ton of one-of-a-kind elements. So
That's true for all the Disney parks around the world,
Yeah.
and it's why it's worth visiting all of them individually, is because each of them has some really special things.
yeah, it is something you'll want to factor in. If you have a kid who is like obsessed with cars, like if that's your goal, like they want to go and hang out with McQueen and Mater, you'll find McQueen and Mater on both coasts, but there's only one Cars Land, and it's in California. It's at Disney's California Adventure. That's unique to that park. Same with Avengers Campus in DCA. That is a one of a kind. So if you have someone obsessed with immersive Avengers experiences, like you probably want to go to California. Again, all the characters are going to show up in some fashion on both coasts, but there are some very large one-of-a-kind elements. I'd say the reason people don't think about attractions and the differences between the coasts enough is because Disneyland, the park, and Magic Kingdom are very similar. So if that's like what you're comparing, you're like, yeah, the park with the castle. It's like, yeah, okay, the parks with the castles, true, very similar. There are differences, but you're right. Those parks look a lot like each other, but everything else is totally unique.
At Disney World, looking at Epcot and Animal Kingdom specifically, they've got some really unique stuff. At Epcot, the World Showcase, there's nothing else like that elsewhere. And I don't know if you've ever gotten drunk drinking around the world at World Showcase, but that is fun.
No, and there was going to be a Westcott, but that got scrapped in California.
Tell me more about Westcott.
Westcott was going to be the California Epcot, but, it came around just at the wrong time. Came around right after Euro Disney kind of tanked. Disney was having some money problems. There was a huge plan for the West Coast version of Epcot for a while, and it got scrapped under Eisner because it was just too big of a plan.
I remember seeing parts of that plan, realizing that as a Southern California resident, we might have had such a thing.
Yeah.
And just crying myself to sleep.
Right. Yeah. We almost had a world showcase.
Other unique things at Disney World, the Kilimanjaro safaris at Animal Kingdom, there's nothing else like that.
Yeah. Disneyland Resort has nothing resembling the luxury zoo of Animal Kingdom.
Animal Kingdom also gets Dinosaur and Expedition Everest, both of which are worth riding. Expedition Everest not to be missed.
That's what's different. There are obviously a lot of shared elements even beyond the castle parks. Magic Kingdom and Disneyland are the greatest overlap, but odds are if you're going to a Disney park, you might have some Star Wars fans in the mix. Both coasts have a Galaxy's Edge. Galaxy's Edge is at Disneyland in California, and it's at Hollywood Studios in Florida. But those are very similar. Like they use the same blueprint on that one, which is kind of rare for Disney.
Yeah, it's if you're in one, you might forget where you are.
Yeah, yeah. And I forget all the time.
California or Florida.
That's the thing that throws me off most about the castle parks is I know that Galaxy's Edge is in Disneyland, so they're definitely and this happens.
It makes you think it's in Magic Kingdom.
It happens to tourists all the time. They assume it's in Magic Kingdom, and they show up and they're like Star Wars, and they're like, oh fuck, it's where? It's at Hollywood Studios. I think it's worth noting both have a Trader Sam's. It's like the best tiki bar in the world. Even there's a big difference. Trader Sam's happens like at the Disneyland Hotel as like one of their restaurants, and whereas Trader Sam's is a part of the Polynesian in Florida.
If you're a big fan of one park or the other, like if you grew up in Southern California or if you grew up in Central Florida and you know Disneyland or Disney World like the back of your hand, it is probably pretty fun to go to the other park because even the things that are duplicated do end up having their own little unique differences. So using Haunted Mansion as an example, there are no two Haunted Mansions that are alike. And the difference between the one that's at Disney World and Disneyland, there's a whole section of ride that you're not going to get at the other one.
Yeah, yeah. And you look at the outside and you're like, wait, these are supposed to be the same ride? Like the mansions themselves look completely different.
Exactly. New Orleans Square, the outside of the mansion was intended to be deceptive. Like, oh, look, here's this pretty old plantation or whatever.
Yeah.
And then it's haunted on the inside. Whereas the version at Disney World is intended to look spookified.
Yeah. And growing up, I went to Disney World before I ever went to Disneyland. And I remember getting to Disneyland. I was like an adult when I went to Disneyland for the first time. I remember seeing the Haunted Mansion and being like, what? That doesn't even look haunted. Like, what?
Okay,
Yeah. It threw me off. I was like, this doesn't look like the Haunted Mansion? What? So a lot of the rides by virtue of space at Disney World might be a little longer, a little bit more elaborate, but not all of them. Pirates of the Caribbean is a notable exception. Pirates of the Caribbean in Disneyland is so much longer and better than the one in Magic Kingdom.
Agreed.
And again, yeah, these are just things that, like, if you've ridden both of them once, you'll be like, yeah, that was Pirates of the Caribbean. But if you're like a fan and you know one of them really well, you're like, what? In my opinion, which is a very, very reliable, educated opinion.
Important,
Yes.
many would say.
Yes. So Disneyland for me definitely wins big on the ease of park going. The walkability between Disneyland, Disney's California Adventure, and all of the Disney hotels and the shopping district, that's huge for me. I'm a big walker. Like, when I'm on vacation, I don't want to get in a car. I just want to walk to the things, and I like to be flexible. Like, I love that I don't have to over plan at Disneyland, that I can be like, you know what, I feel like going to the other park now. So I absolutely love that about Disneyland. And then the other big one is nostalgia. It is the original, and it feels like it. Not because it feels old and crappy, but it is just infused with a sense of history that isn't present in Florida.
It's almost like a 1955 car that's been really lovingly maintained.
Right.
And even if that same car has been lovingly maintained in Florida, it's still a car from the early 1970s. So that's a different kind of car. And let's be honest, the castle at Disneyland is kind of pathetic compared to all of the other castles.
It's teensy.
It
It's
really
Sleeping
is.
Beauty castle.
It looks like Barbie's dream house,
Yeah,
less than a princess's castle.
It does, and that is the thing. I mean, Magic Kingdom is so much bigger than Disneyland, and if you've only been to Disneyland, you walk into Magic Kingdom, you're like, holy shit, I have to walk so much further. But, like, the castle is what makes it really obvious. You're like, that's a big damn castle.
I love seeing like reveal videos of people who have only been to Disney World going to Disneyland for the first time and seeing the castle because they're all disappointed. Well, let's talk about where Disney World really takes the cake. The vacation experience, the feeling of being inside of a Disney experience. You're going to get that way more at Disney World than it's even possible to get at Disneyland. It's immersive in a way that Disneyland cannot be because of space constraints and just by nature of being in an urban California area versus having almost unlimited space there in Florida. You're also just going to have a lot more things to do. We brought up the fact that there's like the same amount of rides, but that's just rides, okay? If you're talking about things to do, tons of things to do. At Disney World, it's going to take you vacation after vacation after vacation to see all the stuff you never could. At Disneyland, you're probably going to be able to see all the things that you want to see in a week or maybe less.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, downtown Disney in California versus Disney Springs is a good comparison because, I mean, pop over to downtown Disney. It's a restaurants and shopping, but you know, you can just swing on through it. Disney Springs, you could spend like 2 days of your vacation there. I try pretty hard not to just like read quotes off of social media, but, big but, I did while we were researching this topic find a really great Reddit thread that was meant to answer exactly this question, Disney World or Disneyland, and the top voted comment really nails it. So I'm just going to read it. I would sum it up as Disneyland is the better theme park and Disney World is the better resort. So Disneyland is better for 1 to 3 days, but Disney World is better for a week-long vacation. Disneyland is much denser with rides. Disneyland plus DCA have nearly as many rides as all 4 of WDW's parks combined and has a unique charm that comes from it having a longer history. But Disney World has 4 theme parks and themed hotels at a variety of price points, and both have some excellent rides that are unique to them. Am I telling you that you made it all the way to the end of this podcast, and really, you could have just read that Reddit comment? Yes, I am, but I hope we brought something unique to it.
But which one should you go to? I don't know. That depends on what you want to get out of your vacation, and hopefully some of the crap that we said in this podcast is going to help you make that decision. Thanks for listening to our podcast. If you're planning a Disney World vacation soon and you want to learn a bit more about the most affordable hotels, definitely check out our recent episode on why you should stay at Disney World's value resorts. And we'll see you in the next one.